If you're interviewing real estate agents to sell your home, you're probably asking about marketing, experience, commission, and what they think your house is worth. But there's another skill I think sellers should be paying very close attention to, and it's surprisingly difficult to evaluate during a listing appointment: negotiation. I recently had a seller tell me that something I did during our very first conversation showed them that I was the person they wanted negotiating the sale of their home. And stay with me because I'll tell you exactly what happened and the question they asked that led to it. I'm Rachel Hayes-Carr, your Sonoma County realtor, and negotiation is one of the most important parts of what I do for my clients. It is also a skill that varies tremendously from agent to agent. I know because I negotiate with other agents every day, and sellers sometimes underestimate just how much negotiation actually happens during a real estate transaction. It's not simply, here's the asking price, here's the offer, let's meet somewhere in the middle. You can be negotiating from the moment an offer comes in until the moment the transaction closes. Price, contingencies, inspections, credits, closing dates, possession, appraisal issues, repairs, and sometimes several of those things are happening at the same time. That's why good negotiation starts with strategy. Before I make a move, I want to know where my client wants to end up. What matters most to them? Where do we have leverage and where are we exposed? Strategy is the overall plan, and tactics are the individual moves that you make to get there, and those matter also. Sometimes you need to make a demand, sometimes you need to ask for more than you think the other side wants to give, sometimes you need to hold your position even when the other side is pushing hard for an answer, and sometimes the smartest thing you can do is slow the conversation down and let the other side sit with your position. At other times, speed is everything. You recognize an opening and you act immediately before the circumstances change. That judgment, knowing when to wait and when to move, is a huge part of negotiation. And so is being comfortable with pressure. A strong negotiator can't become nervous simply because the other side is unhappy. You have to be willing to make an uncomfortable ask. You have to be willing to hear no. You have to be willing to hold your ground when it's in your client's best interest. And that doesn't mean being reckless, it means being calculated. And that's why information matters so much. I want to know as much as I reasonably can. What does the buyer care about? Why are they buying? And what terms matter to them? And what has their agent told me without necessarily realizing they've told me something useful? A good negotiation requires listening. A lot of people think negotiation means talking someone into something. Often it's the opposite. You listen carefully enough, people tell you what matters to them. And once you understand that, you can negotiate much more effectively. And if you always have to prepare for surprises, because real estate transactions rarely go exactly according to plan. An inspection uncovers something unexpected, the appraisal comes in low, another offer appears, someone changes their position, a deadline starts approaching. The goal is not to react emotionally every time circumstances change. You adjust, you decide whether the new information actually changes your strategy, and you keep your eye on the outcome your client hired you to achieve. And here's another thing I think people sometimes misunderstand about negotiation. Being a strong negotiator doesn't mean being mean. It doesn't mean being rude. And it doesn't mean trying to intimidate everyone involved. In fact, that can cost you leverage. To me, good negotiation is being clear, strategic, and constantly asking, what move gives my client the strongest position from here? And that brings me back to the seller I mentioned at the beginning. I represented them on the sale of their home on Verbena Drive in Santa Rosa. And during our very first conversation, they asked me about my commission, and that's a completely fair question. But instead of immediately lowering my fee or becoming uncomfortable defending it, I explained what I charge, the level of service I provide, and why I believe the value I would bring their transaction justified that fee. Apparently, that moment stuck with them. After we closed, they wrote a public review about their experience working with me, and they specifically mentioned that first conversation. Rachel completely sold me during our very first conversation when I asked her about her commission rate. She didn't flinch, stutter, or apologize. She firmly and brilliantly defended her value. Believe me, if your agent won't defend their own value, they certainly won't defend the value of your home. I was convinced from that conversation on, and she proved me right every step of the way. I loved that observation because they weren't only negotiating my commission, they were watching how I responded to being negotiated with. And later in the same review, they described me as, quote, handling negotiations like a cold-blooded pro. I have to admit, that one made me laugh, especially because I don't think cold-blooded is how most people would describe me after meeting me, but I understood exactly what they meant, and I actually really appreciated that they saw that side of me because I think it's one of the most important values I bring to my clients, and it's not always something people see right away. When you meet me, you're probably going to experience someone who's warm, caring, and genuinely invested in what matters to you. But behind that is another side of how I work. I'm highly strategic, I'm comfortable with pressure, I'm willing to make the difficult ask, and I'm not afraid of an uncomfortable conversation when there's something meaningful at stake for my client. You don't necessarily see all of that sitting across from me at a listing appointment. You see it when the deal gets complicated. You see it when the other side starts pushing. You see it when there's real money on the table and when we have to decide whether we want to move, wait, push back, or walk away. And that's when negotiation becomes more than a personality trait. It is a skill. It's one of the ways I protect my clients. When I'm sitting across from my clients, I want them to feel cared for, but when I am representing their interests, they also need to know that I am willing to fight for the outcome we have agreed that they're trying to achieve. The toughest sounding negotiator isn't automatically the best negotiator either. The real skill is knowing what you are trying to achieve, understanding the people and leverage involved, and making disciplined decisions all the way through the transaction. So if you're interviewing agents to sell your home, absolutely ask about their marketing plan, ask about their experience, but I would also ask them about negotiation and pay attention to how they handle difficult questions from you during the interview itself. Because at some point during the sale of your home, you are going to need that person to advocate for you. Now, if you're thinking about selling a home in Santa Rosa or anywhere in Sonoma County, and you're trying to figure out who you want representing you, let's talk. I will learn about your property and what matters most to you in the sale, and I'll share the strategy that I would use to position, market, and negotiate it. Give me a call, even if you're still a few months or even longer from selling, that is completely fine. Often that's the best time to start planning. And thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.